Today I would like to talk about the traits and qualities that survivors like you and me need, that they will learn, and that they will also master when they embark on the healing journey. And I'm also going to share with you some of my personal experiences, what helped me along the way, and the skills I developed or improved over time that made me successful on my own healing journey. Before I begin though, I have to put a disclaimer up front. I understand that you may be in a really dark place right now if you're only at the beginning. But just because you may not have these traits or qualities right now, it doesn't mean that you cannot heal from narcissistic abuse. They will come with time. So when you look for help and support and start counseling or therapy, I totally understand the difficulties of opening up to a stranger, especially when you were dealing with a covert narcissist who seemed to be so supportive in the beginning and then turned out to be somebody else, especially after we had been invalidated for so long and maybe loved and trusted somebody unconditionally for the very first time in our lives. It made us reserved. I also understand the feeling of invalidation or being misunderstood when a counselor or therapist doesn't know anything about narcissistic abuse. They often specialize in domestic violence, abusive behavior, or trauma in general. But do they have to? Not necessarily. At least that was my experience. The question is, are you making any progress? While my counselor knew nothing about narcissistic abuse, I noticed how I was making progress. I was slowly able to do simple tasks again, like cleaning my apartment or cooking for myself. It may sound ridiculous today, but just peeling a couple of potatoes and putting them into hot water seemed like a huge step to me. Or leaving the house and going out for a walk, which I had always done before I had met the narcissist. And over time I also noticed how my flashbacks dissolved. A good habit is to keep a journal that helps you processing your traumatic experiences and thoughts. I realized I was making progress when the gaps between my entries became longer and longer until I stopped journaling altogether and realized I had arrived. This was the end of the tunnel, the end of the darkness that had been surrounding me for so long. While narcissistic abuse is more and more talked about, finding a trained professional who is specialized in narcissistic abuse is like finding a needle in a haystack still these days. That's why survivors like me and others keep on creating awareness to provide more access to our information, knowledge, and experience. While I was in counseling, talking to other survivors online helped me to supplement that part that wasn't covered or talked about in my therapy sessions. It was validating. One thing you need to understand in this context is that counselors or therapists are not magicians. They can't know everything, and they can't read our minds either. They keep on learning and training too, and constantly add to their repertoire. The way I looked at it, it was kind of a give and take situation. In the course of my counseling sessions, I wrote the book Narcotic, which this channel is inspired by, and my counselor learned about narcissistic abuse that way. She even told me that she recognized a few people in her own circle that fit the description. We cannot rely 100% on our counselors or therapists to do the work for us, and need to keep in mind that they are there to support, to guide, and sometimes to give us that little nudge that puts us back on track when we stumble along the way. Therefore, we need to develop our own superpowers, so to speak, that will lead us to that light at the end of that dark tunnel that is our trauma and conditioning. So what is the first thing survivors need in order to heal from trauma and narcissistic abuse? It is acceptance. Without acceptance of what is or what was in the past, you will build reluctance. Joseph Campbell, the inventor of the so-called hero's journey, used to call it the refusal of the call that prevents the hero in a story to go over the first threshold into the unknown where growth happens. In your case, you're the hero in your own story, and the call is the call to heal. After so many attempts to change the narcissist or his many broken promises of change, the most important thing is to accept the things you cannot change and let them go. This includes people, things, or circumstances. Narcissists cannot be changed, just like the weather, to give you an example of circumstance. Accept that you can only change yourself, and without letting go, you'll be slowing down or hindering your own progress in life. You may have heard the term radical acceptance before when it comes to narcissistic abuse. It means to abruptly put an end to our hopes right here, right now, and to accept that moving on from what tried to destroy us is going to be the best decision. It counters the ruminating and clinging to the hope that the situation with a narcissist may at some point improve, and makes going no contact so much easier. And with the acceptance of knowing you can only change yourself comes responsibility. Carrying responsibility, as I said in a previous podcast that I will link in the description below, does not mean that you were at fault for the abuse that you have endured. Your responsibility as a survivor is to take your life back into your own hands for an independent and better future to come. And with that comes my next point, courage. Making the first step into the unknown, the decision to actively heal and confront your own demons, so to speak, takes courage. And let me tell you, you will gain so much more courage throughout the healing journey. It's like nothing can ever stop you again. I remember when my own counselor told me during our first meeting, "You're going to cry a lot during our sessions. Are you sure you want to do this?" And oh yeah, did I cry. I'd never cried in front of a stranger. That in itself took courage. Being 100% vulnerable with someone, entering that dark tunnel I mentioned before, while already feeling scared, lost, and lonely, and reflecting on the good, the bad, and the ugly. So yeah, openness is another quality. Be curious. Be willing to learn, not just about yourself, but others too. I literally had to relearn how the world works once I was stripping off all that old conditioning and walked out of the fog. And let me tell you, yeah, it was shocking and exhausting to get to know the real world. But what was even more shocking was to realize that I had been living in this matrix for over 30 years with a defect programming. And I needed to get rid of that sort of computer bug on my hard drive because it prevented me from accessing my truest self and full potential. And you know what's standing in our way to that exact openness and curiosity? It's our own ego. Eckhart Tolle was speaking of the so-called ego death that you experience when you are on the road to enlightenment. And that's exactly what that is. If you want to change for the better, if you want to have a life as unproblematic as possible, the human ego is struggling to survive because it feeds itself on the illusion that was our life so far. It hates being raw and vulnerable. It hates realness. It hates openness. It wants to keep us and our faulty beliefs of ourselves and the world around us in check. The ego itself puts its guard up. But with our guard up, there is no healing possible, and we can't become our strongest, most authentic selves that way. So next, it's important to have trust. Trust is the foundation of all good relationships, most importantly in the relationship to ourselves. And that's why counselors or therapists often begin the very first session with the words, "I believe you." After all the invalidation and mistrust we've been experiencing, it's quite an impactful statement to hear. For some, may be unbelievable indeed. I believe you, and I believe in you. And with trust, openness, and curiosity also comes understanding. And out of understanding grows mutual respect. And it was exactly that mutual understanding that kept me going to my counselor despite her not having been familiar with narcissistic abuse. But like me, she also had this trust, openness, and curiosity leading to a willingness to learn. Truth be told, being so obsessed and occupied with narcissistic abuse at the time, I didn't know much about what she was telling me either. In fact, it took me a year to fully understand what she was after and trying to teach me. She introduced me to my inner child and my responsibilities as an adult. Like many, I misunderstood that taking responsibility as an adult meant I can't be emotional anymore, that I had to act all grown up out of a sudden and rise above everything. But that's not what she was talking about. It was my responsibility to be able to rely on myself, to trust myself and my experience, as well as my own instincts and intuition. And in the course of my healing journey and strengthening my understanding about myself and other people, questions like, "Why didn't you just leave?" also became less triggering. I understood that there are people out there who had never been in our situation. And looking from the outside in, it truly seems impossible to understand on their end why anybody would expose themselves to such treatment. But instead of taking offense, I started to have an open and honest conversation. I began to share my story with those who didn't know any better. I appreciated their own openness and curiosity to understand and learn. Again, that's how mutual respect is built, by not letting the ego get in our way. And that leads us to integrity. And with integrity comes honesty, commitment, and accountability. If you want to heal and become the best version of yourself, you need to be absolutely honest with yourself, to dig through the shame and open doors to parts that had been locked up for too long. You need to have the commitment to show up for yourself over and over again, even on the bad days, especially on the bad days. And then there's accountability, one of the most humane traits that you will develop. What's your part in the story? That doesn't mean you are at fault for what happened when you didn't know any better. You had been conditioned to accept abuse. But accepting your own flaws and shortcomings that played a part in enabling other people's toxic or abusive behavior helps you to stop being the enabler. In the future, you will ask yourself and reflect on the question, what could I have done better? Or what can I do better, depending on the circumstances? And that teaches you how to navigate life or difficult situations with the best possible outcome. Remember that healing is a marathon and not a sprint. So being realistic is another important trait. And that's why, unlike a narcissist who's fallen for his own delusions, you have the ability to change. The key here is patience. Be patient with yourself and others. And that exact patience will lead to compassion, forgiveness, love, and kindness for yourself. And as you keep on walking with that same integrity and showing up for yourself, maybe even for others, you grow the resilience and leadership that makes you a strong and unstoppable survivor. You will know how to apply the knowledge and the tools provided. You know how to honor the red flags and, more importantly, yourself, should another one of them try to take advantage. You know how to implement boundaries. You're going to show them where the door is faster than ever before. And that door stays shut and sealed forever after the first time around. So yeah, these are the traits and qualities that survivors will need, learn, and master when they fully commit to the healing journey. I know that change is scary. And as difficult and often painful as making this one is, it's the best change you will have ever made. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger is not just a stupid catchphrase. It exists for a reason. You'll see if you're willing to do the work. Thank you very much for listening. I wish you all the best on your journey.